Hi, and welcome back to Continual Horror. Tonight, we are going to be talking about a lot of people's gateway into the joys of horror in film. Nothing other than the studio that brought Christopher Lee, David Prouse, Oliver Reed, Bela Lugosi, and so many others to bring back and reprise the characters of Dracula, Frankenstein, and the Mummy. It is none other than Hammer Films. So tonight we're going to be having a bit of fun with Hammer. I am your host, Jim Nettles. But before we get started, let's see who else has joined us for this little fun party. So Clay, you're up first.
Oh, good. Hi, my name is Clay Griffith. I am an author. I usually write with my wife, Susan. So we are Clay and Susan Griffith. We're the authors of the Vampire Empire series and the Crown and Key trilogy, both of which are Victorian themed, and both of which are heavily influenced by my childhood watching Hammer films. So this is a big deal.
Bill?
Hi, I'm Bill Mulligan. I'm a high school science teacher, podcaster, indie filmmaker, and my first book, Realm, will be published later this year from Falstaff Books, which I'm very excited about. And I love Hammer. I've loved it since I was 11 years old, and I'll love it till the day I die.
Fraser?
I'm Fraser Sherman. I write historical fantasy. I also write movie books and also more movie books put out by McFarlane. I will have a self-published steampunk novel and a fifth movie book coming out later this year.
And Greg?
Hi, I just noticed that my name on the thing is Gregorius U, which is my pen name for when I do art. I am a cartoonist. I was doing a political cartoon from 2003 to about 2012, and then I decided that it was not worth continuing political cartoons because I was getting death threats and other things like that. I'm also a writer, and I am working on a graphic novel on the Hanako-san urban legend from Japan. And I am also the husband of the famous Jean Marie Ward, whom everybody knows from ConTinual.
We might have met her once or twice. So let's start in with a fun question. So Clay, you'll go up first with this one as well.
Okay.
What is your first memory of a Hammer film?
Likely my first memory is Horror of Dracula, which is probably a lot of people's first memory. I'm too, it's hard for me to say I'm too young for anything, but I'm too young to remember most of the core horror, Hammer horror stuff in the theaters. My introduction came on the good old-fashioned Friday and Saturday night late shows. And I was a Dracula kid. Dracula is the most influential novel I ever read. And so the Dracula movies that Hammer did were right up my street. And Horror of Dracula was like Gone with the Wind or Casablanca to me when I was 12. It was just amazing, and it's still the most important Hammer film. Probably it may well be the best actually, but certainly the most important to me going forward.
How about you, Bill?
Now, I think probably the first Hammer film I saw was 1 million years BC, but I didn't really think of it as a Hammer film. It was a Harryhausen film. The first Hammer film proper, I went to a double feature as a kid and saw, I believe it was Blood from the Mummy's Tomb, and most importantly, Vampire Circus. And for an 11 or 12-year-old kid who was raised on the Bela Lugosi and Boris Karloff films, to suddenly see all this red blood and naked bodies and gore, what seemed at the time to be unbelievable gore now seems very tasteful in comparison to what we have now. It was a revelation, and I don't think I've ever recovered.
How about you, Fraser?
Let's see. The first one that I can recall was catching Captain Kronos Vampire Hunter on TBS one summer during college. And I think the next was Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde. They felt I'd seen a lot of the Universal horror films in syndication. These felt very different with a very distinctive style. And let's face it, the women were stunning. Martine Beswick, Carolyn Monroe, Kate Mara, Lalla Ward in Vampire Circus, and so many others, which when you're in your teens and 20s is a nice factor.
How about you, Greg?
Okay, well, I started it before we started, actually. So I am 8 years old. It's 1959. My parents have taken my brother and me to go see Peter Pan in the marquee, the lobby of the hotel of the movie theater is a marquee card for House on Haunted Hill. Oh, Mom, we're not going to see that. No, that's not going to be here. So we go in and we get coming attractions, and it's Horror of Dracula. Zoom, I went under the seat. But I kept peeking every time I could hear the announcer say another word, and I remembered every single thing in the trailer from when I saw it again on Turner Classic Movies. I did see Horror of Dracula in the theater, actually, finally, when I was in college. But ever since then, I've been a fan.
Ironically enough, I think the first Hammer film I ever saw was Alan Quartermain. Was a replay of the Quartermain movies, which then kind of, I think, led into, because I saw Alan Quartermain before I ever saw Raiders of the Lost Ark as a little kid. And then, but I mean, it was one of those things of course, that is just before and right about the start of the horror years. And then after that, I think the first one I saw was the Frankenstein, before I even saw the Dracula films. Now, I love all the old Dracula films. Absolutely love them all. Even the one where Christopher Lee doesn't grunt a word the entire time out of protest. Just this look of consternation throughout the entire thing, like blah, 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 blah. Why am I? Oh, yeah, paycheck. Write me the paycheck. Let me keep going. Even that one is a tremendous amount of fun. So, Bill, since you're a high school teacher and lover of film, what from the Hammer era has kind of come in and maybe even inspired you a bit? Because I think we can even see maybe a few props around there, or maybe that's just a student cast in concrete.
No, there's a mummy somewhere in the back there. I learned nothing from the Hammer mummy film, which I love, because if I paid attention, they said it took 6 hours or so to wrap up Christopher Lee as the mummy, and I figured we could do it faster. And it took 6 hours to wrap up someone as a mummy. It's not easy. I think what I took away from Hammer, what I just love about them, the production values. These were not high budget films by most standards, but they sure looked high budget. I mean, when you compare the Hammer product to what was coming out from America, there's just no comparison. Everything looks so lush. The British just had a really good sense of style. Even their low budget films just look good. These were craftsmen who took pride in making sure the photography was razor sharp and the colors, if there were any, were just beautiful. Directors like Terence Fisher, no matter what they worked on, gave it 100%. And I just love that look. It's you can almost immediately tell you're watching a Hammer movie. Just anytime you turn it on, just look at how good it looks.
Even when they gave Roger Corman a budget, he didn't do it as well as Hammer.
Yeah. The American films have energy and they have their own charms, but there's definitely something about the Hammer films that just screams value.
They really made use of that Bray studio. They reuse so many sets, but they redress them so well that you don't see it.
Exactly.
Yeah,
that's true.
So, Fraser,
Yeah.
in the books you've written. How much stuff have you written about the Hammer films, and how much has that inspired some of the stuff you've worked on?
As far as actually writing in my film books, my time travel book, Now and Then We Time Travel, includes a brief mention of prehistoric women, which involves the protagonist going back to a lost land where Martine Beswick, who makes a magnificent evil queen, leads the brunettes to rule over the blondes. It is not good, but Beswick almost makes it worth watching. In terms of influence, nothing direct, but Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde, which works in Burke and Hare, Jack the Ripper, Dr. Jekyll, who also turns into, again, Martine Beswick. It is so wild lumping them all together, and it has such a, as was just said, a lush visual style. It is something, if I were going to try to imitate a Hammer movie, that is probably the one I would go for.
So, Greg, what have you got for us? So, for you, what is it about the Hammer films that maybe is coming as inspiration, or the things that you just really love to draw off of?
I love the performances of Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing. Especially Peter Cushing, because I imitate him very well. And but the photography is the Jack Asher use of color, the music with James Bernard, whatever, however you pronounce his last name. It all makes this a Hammer movie. And of course, Terrence Fisher's directing and Jimmy Sangster's scripts. Well, Sangster's scripts don't always make sense, but I like them anyway.
Wait, Hammer films were supposed to make sense?
Well, no horror movie, even from Dracula on, there was always the original Bela Lugosi one. There was always a rush to the finish, so things got left out, and Sangster kept in that tradition.
So, Clay, how about you? I know you've pulled some inspirations from the Hammer films.
Oh, not just inspiration, pretty much flat out lifts. I mean, the thing that, as I mentioned, even probably before I saw Hammer, I was a Dracula guy. So Hammer fed that love. I was also a Sherlock Holmes kid. So as Bill mentioned earlier, that feel of Hammer is almost as important, if not more important, than what the actual movie is about. I mean the historicals. They did some modern stuff too, but it's the feel of the Victorian era versus the real historical Victorian era. It's sort of like Western movies. American Westerns have a universe all their own, which is separate from the real West. You can do the real West, but then there's the Hollywood Western. Well, Hammer is the Hollywood Victorian era, and it's carriages and gas lamps and fog and top hats and capes and a level of politeness that hides the fury of people underneath and monsters bursting through that politeness and killing people. And that's the kind of thing I took, that I could write Victorian stories that had these Victorian sensibilities, but I didn't have to get bogged down in all the elements of history because I'm writing fantasy. And Hammer is a marvelous Bible for that feel, for that Victoriana, without necessarily having to worry about how many buttons were on a waistcoat or how long it took to walk from St. Paul's to Westminster. You could feel the Victorianism without necessarily having to get a PhD in it.
So, and this is always a dangerous question to ask. And Fraser, you're going to be up for this one first. What is your favorite quintessential Hammer film?
That is a very okay. I will give you three. Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde again. The Vampire Lovers, because it's probably the best adaptation of J. Sheridan Le Fanu's Carmilla, which is about a lesbian vampire that I'm aware of. And I happen to be a great fan of the story. And while it is not typical Hammer, Quartermass and the Pit, which is based on a British TV serial by Nigel Neal, and which I will be covering in my next movie book, it's the best treatment of the idea of gods from outer space shaping human evolution that anyone has done on screen. It is wildly imaginative, and compared to most of what was being done in SF in the 50s or the 1960s, way ahead of the time, and it's really good.
I have it on my DVD collection over here in the corner.
Me too.
Of the more obscure stuff. So, Greg, how about you? What is that quintessential, your favorite Hammer film or films?
Well, I will go and do a 3 like Fraser just did. Horror of Dracula, of course. And I have a copy of the screenplay right here. That has everything in it. But I have my really favorite is the Revenge of Frankenstein. I consider that a comedy.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, because they treat the chimpanzee who ate his wife. He had another monkey. Well, what else would he be married to? It's just brilliant. And of course, Dr. Frankenstein is living and relatively happy at the end.
Got to have a happy ending in the occasional film.
Yes, exactly.
How about you, Clay? Oh, sorry, Greg.
Oh, no problem. For really bad reasons, I love the Gorgon, because when you get to the end of it and you see the Gorgon, you go, "Oh my God!" But that's it. Yes,
the Gorgon does hold a special place in my heart and may have worked its way into some of my own stuff, but that's a different story.
Yes.
How about you, Clay?
Well, obviously, Horror of Dracula. I mean, it's the king. You just can't beat the bit where Peter Cushing runs across the table and leaps on the curtains, and then he holds up the candlesticks. I mean, it's as good as it gets. But actually, probably better as a movie, although not to me, but Brides of Dracula is fantastic. It's a well-structured movie. It also has the benefits of Peter Cushing giving a really good performance. I like the Gorgon as well. I'm not sure "like" is the right word. I don't know what the hell the Gorgon is. It's the Gorgon.
It's a guilty pleasure.
Oh, it's. I'm not sure they knew what they were making, but it's the strangest sort of weird Victorian fairy tale mishmash thing that's got all the cliches that Hammer used. They probably brought all their cliche note cards in and just tacked them up on the wall, threw some rubber snakes on her head, and made a movie. But those are probably my favorites. Those are the ones that I remember the best.
How about you, Bill? What's that favorite
The
film?
disadvantage of being last is everything that's already been mentioned. I love Brides of Dracula because Peter Cushing's my favorite actor, and he's the show in this one. The Dracula, the vampire, is actually kind of weak sauce in that, but it's got absolutely beautiful vampire women. And again, when you watch it at a certain age, and girls are kind of scary anyway, these women were just so fascinating and beautiful and will probably kill you. So that resonated. And
that scene, just to piggyback on that scene where the lady is trying to get the new vampire out of the grave, like she's a midwife birthing something, that's brilliant. Yeah. It's brilliant.
It really is. I love the Gorgon. And yeah, for all its flaws, the biggest flaw being the Gorgon, which is a problem when the biggest problem in your Gorgon movie is the Gorgon. Up to that
Christopher Lee
point,
said that too.
Yeah, up to that point, I think it's got the prettiest color palette of any of Hammer's films. Terrence Fisher is just a master, and it's really cool to see Cushing and Lee kind of reversing their roles, where Lee is the good guy and Cushing's the bad guy. There's so much fun together, the two of them, under any circumstance. But it's just such a great film, and it's the one time I would not complain if they went back and fixed it. Like if they did a little CGI. I hate it when they colorize films, but if somebody wants to go in and actually put snakes that look like snakes, not rubber snakes, but actual snakes in the gore, I'm okay with that. I will contribute to that GoFundMe. And the third one, I never know if I'm pronouncing it right or not. Quartermass.
It's Quartermass.
Okay. See, I've heard it. I always get corrected no matter what I say, but I love that film. They didn't do a lot of science fiction, but boy, when they did, they could knock it out of the park. And it just breaks my heart that one of the many great unmade Hammer films was that they were going to do I Am Legend with Peter Cushing in the lead role, and it would have absolutely been the best adaptation of I Am Legend of any that have been done, although that's a really low bar. So yeah, they just were so good. And tell you the truth, Quartermass in the Pit is one of those ones where I'm thinking, why has that not been remade? Although they kind of did it with Life Force, but the less said of that, the better. I don't know why they haven't bothered to try to go back to that one with all the effects we have now. Yeah, that would be something.
So I'm going to ask this as an open question because this is the one that always kills me. So let's look at all of Hammer's legacy. If you did not have Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing, would you have had a Hammer Studios?
They would not have the reputation they do. They could still have a lot of good movies, quirky things like The Nanny and Hands of the Ripper, the Quartermass adaptations, but it would not be Hammer Studios, I don't think.
No, it wouldn't be. We wouldn't be doing this podcast, I don't think. Those two were just so perfect in their roles, both excellent in different ways. Peter Cushing is Frankenstein, the right Frankenstein. Okay, Boris Karloff is the Frankenstein monster in my mind, but Peter Cushing will always be Dr. Frankenstein. And Christopher Lee could take something like The Mummy, where he is literally covered head to toe. There is nothing for him to work with except his eyes, and he still makes it work. He was not just physically imposing, he was an underrated actor.
That's still one of my favorites, is The Mummy.
Yeah.
Greg? Clay?
I don't think it would be Hammer would have been Hammer without Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing. As Christopher Lee got rather tired of playing Dracula, but they kept on saying, but we need you to play it because the studio is running out of money again and again. But Peter Cushing is one of my favorite actors, and I will watch anything with him in it. And they just made Hammer Studios.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I think without Cushing and Lee, they would have been like Amicus, that sort of level, which they made some okay stuff, but not Hammer level stuff. And Cushing was my guy too. I mean, I was a member of the Peter Cushing fan club when I was young.
So was I.
Did you get an autographed picture?
I did.
I don't know that I still have mine, but I think it may have.
My wallet was stolen, and that was the thing I missed the most.
Oh yeah.
Mm.
But when I was a kid, I loved the Dracula movies because they moved to me more, and I love watching Christopher Lee walk with a cape. But the Frankenstein movies kind of bored me when I was a kid. Later, when I was a little bit older, I saw them again, and I thought, wow, these are not. I mean, they're not just Hammer good; these are actually really good. And he's he's quite good. He's very menacing and horrible in most of these movies. I was stunned because I never paid much attention to him as a kid, except for the flavor, the Victorian flavor. But then later I realized these are really first rate.
And they also ask questions that you don't really see in most monster movies, like the transference of the soul in Frankenstein Created Woman.
Yeah.
Which I really like, just the idea that this scientist would actually be trying soul transfers.
And that would make that the film at that time.
Yeah, exactly.
There's even kind of an arc for the character over the films. It's not perfect. It wasn't thought out. It's sometimes the continuity is a little wonky, but he starts out as this young, ambitious, amoral scientist, becomes utterly evil by the time of Frankenstein Must Be Destroyed, and ends up as a lunatic, still doing the same stuff he's done all along, presumably will do it till the day he dies, maybe beyond that. And it's kind of cool to see this character, and that, Hammer got the fact that Frankenstein was not the monster. The monster is often the least interesting thing about the Frankenstein movies.
Mm-hmm.
Because the monster's not really the monster in the movies, is it? It's usually Frankenstein.
I don't know this, but maybe one of you guys do. Were the scripts for the Frankenstein pictures written by the same person? I don't even know who wrote them.
I don't know.
Sangster wrote the first two.
Okay.
But I'm not sure about Evil of Frankenstein. And I think he dropped out of it by the Frankenstein Created Woman for sure. But the first two were definitely Jimmy Sangster.
Okay.
Yeah, I was trying to look and see, and I don't remember. So Greg, let me start with you on this one. Hammer films have a couple of very definitive styles and periods as they went along, especially as you got into a little bit of the later stuff where it was ramp up the blood, ramp up the sex. But what is it for you that when you look, if you had never seen it, you would look and go and say, yep, that's a Hammer film?
They have a specific sound. And the James Bernard scores are part of that. They've actually done a few CDs of the music from Hammer, and you can just turn on the television and you hear it and you say, "That's a Hammer movie." So you don't even have to see it; you just hear it. And then when you see it, everybody else has been saying about the color and the sets and everything. Yeah, once you've heard it and seen it, you are just waiting for the characters that you love to show up.
Clay, what about you? What is it for you that would define that absolute essence of a Hammer film?
Well, there's two things. There's one that's good and there's one that's bad to me personally. The good thing is the look. It's the color. It's the depth and the shadows, and they blend shadows with color really well. So obviously they're not black and white films, but they can still get that sort of universal noirish feel with a lot of red and a lot of green and they've got that garish Victorian wallpaper going on, and the houses are super crowded with tchotchkes, which is historically accurate. The bad for me personally, and I know a lot of people have spoken about this tonight, it is the music. And it's specifically the one, there's a sting that they use originally, like when Dracula was running at someone or when the monster was attacking someone, but it seemed like eventually they started using this drum this pounding sting, bah, 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 bah. Anytime someone like walked to the sideboard to get a drink or went to the window, that music sting would come up, and I went through a period where I couldn't watch Hammer very much because that music, that music, not the other background stuff, the incidental stuff, just that action sting started to grind my nerves. I've gotten over it now, but for a while it bugged the crap out of me.
Yeah, it showed up in a lot of things because they recycled their score.
like the creature from the Black Lagoon sting. If you watch the creature from the Black Lagoon now, it's the same sting, and they use it over and over and over, and it starts to get a little tiresome.
And Henry Mancini was responsible for that.
For the creature,
oh, really?
He was in the Universal music department, and that's where he said he learned how to do a score. And he was working on the creature from the Black Lagoon.
Well, it's great. But after about the 15th, 20th time, just swimming through the water, it starts to, tone it down.
Plus, it shows up in other movies, too, like King Kong versus Godzilla.
Mm-hmm. So, Bill, for you, what is it that just cements and says Hammer film?
There's two things, and neither one is particularly good, but I don't care. I love them anyway. The phoniest looking blood on the face of the earth. If I ever showed up on a movie set with Kensington Red, this poster paint, neon, technicolor red blood, they'd kick me off. No one ever bled anything that bright, but that's okay. It actually, I don't know, it just works for me. I love the color. I wish we'd never gone away from technicolor. And the other, and I really can't explain this, some of the worst bats ever. I mean, these folks were so careful about everything, such great craftsmen. There has to be a way of making a fake bat. I know Universal did it. I've watched low-budget movies where there's fake bats, and the one thing that always goes through my head is that's still better than Kiss of the Vampire or just about anything else that came out of Hammer. They were just, whether you could see the strings or not, you knew they were there. But okay, that's all right. Those sins can be forgiven.
Fraser?
I can't think of a specific feature. It's like the whole thing, the style, the actors, the music, the mood, the look. Although that said, there are lots of films that if I watched them and didn't know they were Hammer, I wouldn't think of them that way. Straight mysteries like Scream of Fear, psychological horror like The Nanny with Betty Davis, it's very good. Or Quartermass. It wasn't until I rewatched it for The Aliens Are Here, which is my next movie book, that it sank in that was a Hammer. Which, as someone was saying, they did not do a lot of science fiction, and so my brain would automatically have crossed it out.
Yeah, that's one of those things that I actually think Hammer films did very well. I loved all the sci-fi that they did, which really wasn't that much. But everything they did had had that all-in quality to it, good for good or bad, but it was all in for it. And I think you see some of that because, again, they did so much work with the BBC as well that you had some crossover with their special effects people and the storytelling. And I've always sort of wondered if that was not part of what contributed to the sci-fi that they did do and the elements that pulled forward was because the relationship they had sort of to the BBC. I'm not sure that they didn't just raid the pubs and say, oh yeah, we're going to grab you for the weekend. We'll just keep you drunk and it'll be fine. But so let me throw this out there because a lot of what Hammer did was they came in and they, in a lot of ways, revived the Universal monster movies. They grabbed the characters, which of course by then were public domain from the stories themselves. What do you think Hammer's legacy is with what they did with some of the core monsters? Frankenstein, the Mummy, and of course Dracula. I mean, I've seen that there's a lot of influence in things I've seen, especially around vampires, that the Hammer films seem to have contributed a lot to what is now considered canon and lore that would have been something that was done for almost convenience of special effects at the time. So, what do you guys think about that, of their contribution to lore and how they push these monsters along for a period?
I tend to think that they really contributed to the vampire in a physicality form. Back with Bela Lugosi, it was more the mind control and everything and the willpower. But with Christopher Lee, you get the sexiness and the violence. And it's gone on with especially with the sexiness until we get Sookie Stackhouse. But basically, the vampire has become sort of a messy eater. And I think it started with the Hammer films. Especially if you look at what was that? What We Do in the Shadows.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I would tend to agree with that. I like both. I like the Universals and I like Hammer. Although you still think of Lugosi as Dracula, he really only played it once, and he played a couple of other caped type vampires later. But the Hammer Draculas are better vampire movies than the Universals, I think. Karloff is the monster, so you can't, as Bill said, you can't get away from that. But Cushing, those things are great. Those Frankensteins are great. The first Mummy, the Hammer Mummy, is terrific. The Universal mummies, the Karloff one is good, although the Mummy's only in it for the Mummy, Mummy is only in it for a second or two. But it's great. The other ones are fun, like his Saturday morning cartoon mummy type things, with Bella, with like Lon Chaney Jr. and so forth. But the one that I don't think holds up nearly as well is the werewolf. They didn't do a lot of werewolves. They did the Oliver Reed. Curse of the Werewolf? Is that what it's called?
Curse of the Werewolf. Yeah,
which is interesting. Right. It's different. But the Wolfman, the Universal Wolfman, is, to me, he's still the Wolfman. No one's ever going to knock Lon Chaney Jr. out of his furry feet. But otherwise, I mean, I can see them. They're totally different. But the Hammer stuff is, I don't know if it's equally as good. Dracula, it's better, but yeah, I don't know. I probably would go with Universal if I had to bet. I'd probably go with Universal if I had to.
I'd have to go with Hammer, and I love Oliver Reed's Wolfman. The only problem I have with that movie is there's not enough Wolfman in it. The design is brilliant. Of course, Oliver Reed's a scary guy. Whether he's a werewolf or not, you probably get, but his ferocity, natural ferocity, comes through. And one of the ones that was not successful, Phantom of the Opera, it was one of their few duds at that time when they were pretty much batting 1,000. But it seems to me like that's the Phantom of the Opera that people have really taken and worked with since, this tragic figure. The original Lon Chaney version was a monster. He was evil. He was a monster. There was nothing likable about him, really. And Herbert Lom's version was this kind of sad guy who was done wrong and was seeking fairly righteous revenge. And the love story and the music and everything, I mean, that's what people have taken and run with since. It's kind of the forgotten Hammer film. But they were just good at what they did. They did one Sherlock Holmes film, and it's one of the best Sherlock Holmes films ever. Yeah, of course, it's got Cushing as Holmes is great. You got Lee in a sympathetic role, and it's got a great hound. I mean, what's not to love? But I tend to think almost all the films of Hammer that I love, absolutely love, you got to give credit to Terence Fisher. It's out of my top 10 favorite Hammer films, I'm sure he directed 7 or 8 or 9 of them. He's sort of the third guy. Sorry.
Me too. Are you finished? I don't want to step.
No, yeah, I'm done. Yeah, sorry.
I wouldn't care to pick between Universal and Hammer because I love them both in different ways. I do think Claude Rains beat Herbert Lom to being the sympathetic phantom.
You're right.
And
You're right.
Both of them, unlike Lon Chaney in the novel, are accidental scar faces rather than born freaks, which is another big difference that's been common since. In terms of Hammer's influence, I think the thing I noticed most is that they showed you can get shocking amounts of gore by the standards of the time in Technicolor, which foreshadowed what was to come. And also that in a horror movie, you can get a lot more erotic than you could get away with in a straight film at the time. And we've also seen more of that since. I mean, Christopher Lee is a much sexier vampire than Bela Lugosi is allowed to be. And somebody said he was the most physical. He is someone I could see sticking his enemies' heads on a pike or impaling them in a field. And yeah, there's definitely a physical, sexy quality to Hammer. How much it influenced later movie makers or whether they would have gone that way anyway as society changed, I don't know, but that's what sticks in my mind.
So
can I ask a question?
Sure.
Here's something that surprised me about Hammer. When I was young, I saw them on television, and they were on broadcast television, not in cable. So they were, edited for content on some level, if they needed to be. I didn't realize that the later Hammers used so much blood and actually had nudity. I had no clue. And what ended up happening was you would get movies that were disjointed because they just had to cut out a naked woman. And there might be dialogue there. There might be something there that was just gone from the version I was watching on Channel 5 at 11:30 on Friday night. And then I would go to magazines like, Famous Monsters or Fangoria, and there were these pictures of these naked women with Christopher Lee. And I'm thinking, where the hell is this? I saw this movie, and it's not, I don't remember this woman and with blood dripping down her negligee. Did you guys have the same, or did you see the originals like in the theater and know that that's what Hammer was about?
I was lucky enough to see the originals in the theater because they would just keep showing these matinees. And, it's the funniest thing. Our parents would drop us off for these double feature monster movie matinees. And I'm sure they thought it was Frankenstein meets the Wolfman. Yeah. And it wasn't. It was Countess Dracula and vampire lovers, lust for a vampire. Good Lord. It was, and we were smart enough. I wasn't the smartest kid in the world, but I was smart enough to keep my big yap shut.
Yeah, that was hysterical, Mom. That was just
yeah. Oh yeah, boy, I laughed.
Yeah, I saw a couple of them in syndication, and I don't think there were anything that had nudity. And then the rest I started to see on when videotape became a thing. I managed to catch a lot of them on videotape, so I doubt I missed anything that got cut out.
Greg, I know you went and saw a bunch of them in the theater.
I didn't see very many I think the only one I actually saw in the theater was Horror of Dracula, and during college, when I actually finally got to see it. But I saw them mostly on television, like everybody else, and I knew that the nudity was there, but being cut out because I was reading the monster magazines like Bill did, but I also knew that that these things weren't making all that much sense like he did, and there were things being cut. So I'm really glad that they're available now uncut.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I also believe Forrest Ackerman's claim that they would make 3 different versions of every movie, one for America, one for England, and one from Japan. And the Japanese one was supposed to be completely over the top, like the monster in Curse of Frankenstein had 3 eyes in Japan. And none of that turned out to be true, sad to say, because I'd love to see the 3-eyed monster.
Forrest Ackerman lied about something?
Well, I mean, Forrest Ackerman, from everything I've ever seen, heard, and everything else, definitively could tell a story.
Yeah.
Forrest never let the truth.
He and Stan Lee are the closest to being exactly who they pretended to be of any people ever.
Forey never let the truth get in the way of a good story.
Yeah, I mean, his star has definitely waned, but I have to thank him for putting on the Famous Monsters conventions in, I think, 77, 76, because I went to it and I got to meet Peter Cushing, Ingrid Pitt. Yeah. And there was Forey with, he had the mummy ring from the Mummy. He had Bela Lugosi's cape. He was just like a walking museum of things. Just, he was in his glory. So that was quite an experience for a young man my age. And both Peter Cushing and Ingrid Pitt were exactly and precisely as nice in real life as they have been made out to be. They were just sweet, wonderful people who didn't have to be as nice as they were.
Yeah, I mean, I remember watching a lot of them on, just like you, Clay. It was the late night TV. They were chopped up, and you're like, okay, well, what just happened? But I had two benefits. Number one is there was a small indie art house theater that would show a lot of the old classic films and stuff like that. And you could go, and a lot of the time they would show the full uncut Hammer films and Russ Meyer films and all this sort of stuff a lot of the time. So you could go catch those sitting in the theater, uncut, the whole bit. And then number two, when VHS and stuff like that started coming out, rolling out, and things you were able to catch. So I was able to see a lot of them in the theater, but I've seen you get to see all the stuff that you missed, and occasionally you discover there was a little bit of plot that got cut with the blood and negligees.
Well, when they did finally restore Horror of Dracula, the BFI, British Film Institute, they had to go to Japan to get some of the missing bits. So Forey might have been right about a few things.
Yeah. It was weird too. There were a few that I knew about from Famous Monsters that never got shown on TV. I don't know how old I was before I finally got a chance to see The Reptile or Plague of the Zombies.
Oh, yeah.
The Reptile is so much fun.
Yeah, Hands of the Ripper I didn't get a chance to see until just a few years ago. It was like one of those holy grails that I was always searching for. And I didn't want to get these were films I did not want to buy some cheap duped copy that you could get at conventions, 10th generation, out of focus, blurry. I was willing to wait until the opportunity for a decent copy came along because I didn't want to ruin it. There's some films that I've watched under those circumstances because I thought it was the only way I'd ever see them, and I wish I'd waited because my first experience with them was really subpar. I have too much respect for Hammer to do that.
Well, one more question for everybody. When you look at Hammer films, and of course now they're talking about, starting to go back into production with some stuff. Now the company's been bought and everything else. But do you think that Hammer films can really redefine for now? I mean, so, Hammer was very much a product of a period of time. I mean, even though, they continued to make movies and stuff after, really it was that 50s, 60s, 70s era that defined Hammer films so purely. So what do you guys think that would be the Hammer style now? And can
it would be very difficult?
Well, no, go ahead.
Okay. It would be very difficult to come up with a style, I think, because back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, the Hammer films still had this belief in good and evil, I think. This is just my opinion. They saw Christianity as a force for good. I mean, especially if you look at something like The Devil Rides Out or the various Dracula movies where Peter Cushing is, that has, as he described it once, a crucifix salesman. But we have lost that culturally. We cannot say, oh, Christianity is an absolute force for good because there's too many scandals going on. And I'm not sure that you can say that about any religion, even Muslims or Jewish or whatever. So that was a real strong part of what made Hammer, that belief in the two opposing forces.
That's an interesting idea.
That's a really good point. No, I absolutely agree. And it's interesting. Hammer very clearly. There's good. There's evil. There's no gray vampires there. They're just evil. There's a certain skepticism about authority. The Burgermeister, the head of the town, the upper crust. There's a lot of class struggle. You look at something like Taste the Blood of Dracula, and it's all about these supposed good men of the community who are actually horrifying people and bring all sorts of calamity down upon their children. There's a lot of that older generation ruining things for the next generation. I don't think there's any point in trying to bring Hammer back. It was of its time. Toward the end, it got pretty sad. They were throwing everything they could against the wall to see what would stick, and nothing stuck. There's some great films that come out. I love Seven Brothers versus, the Golden Vampire, whatever. What was it? I keep forgetting the title.
Golden Vampires, wasn't it?
Right. And yeah, that was great stuff. It didn't have Christopher Lee. It had a lookalike, but yeah, they were just trying so hard. But the 1-2 punch of Night of the Living Dead and The Exorcist was it for Hammer. The Victorian thing just couldn't compete. Even some of the semi-successful ones like Dracula AD 1972. That's a fascinating movie to watch, by the way, because they were updating it because they thought the Victorian thing was so dated. There is nothing more dated than the 1972 sections of Dracula AD 72. The Victorian stuff is timeless. It's so far long ago that it doesn't ever look like it's gone out of style because it was never meant to be in style. But when you try to make something modern, it's only modern for a few years, and then it's old, and not old in a good way. So I don't know if there's any way of bringing it back.
Yeah, that movie did look like. How do we present the swinging 60s?
Yeah,
made by Victorians themselves. I mean, it's fun. It's great fun, but it looks, it's really dated. Peter Cushing in a cravat or whatever he's wearing. It's swinging Peter Cushing.
Right.
Peter Cushing, spy
I think,
at large.
I don't know that they could. I don't know if they could have a house style anymore. I don't know that kind of thing works. They've got a lot of intellectual property to mine, and that's what Hollywood's all about these days. You can go a lot of years in Hollywood presenting your next intellectual property, even if no one's ever heard of it. If you can say it exists, it seems like you can make a movie out of it. Like, I think Captain Kronos Vampire Hunter would be primed for a really interesting remake.
Yeah.
Because it's a great idea, but I think kind of a flawed movie. But man, they could do some really cool stuff with that universe. And they should hire me to write it. But
absolutely, on all counts. And yeah, that's a movie that you could see the low budget was beginning to hurt. If that had been made 15, 20 years earlier, that would have been something. I don't know who they would have gotten to play Captain Kronos, but yeah, you're right.
Concept and low budget. Yeah.
Right.
I honestly don't feel there's a need for a new Hammer or a revived Hammer. I mean, the movies exist. They're available. I think styles have changed enough. It's possible somebody could recreate them, but I don't think a whole slew of movies with that kind of elegance and style would really happen. So why worry about it? We have them. We don't need remakes. Except though upgrading some of the special effects might be nice.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I'm gonna throw one more mini question out there because I can't help it. Because we see so much stuff that's CGI now. One of the things that really defined Hammer films was how well they did most of their practical effects, and the stuff they didn't do well, they just basically said, "We know it sucks. Go on with it." Do you think that? I mean, from a special effects standpoint, when you look at Hammer overall and the practical effects from the day, how many of you really want to see us go back to the practical effects versus the CGI?
Oh, 100%. Although, ideally, as a special effects person, I don't hate CGI. CGI can do wonderful things in making practical effects look great. And if you have $500 million and you're doing Avatar, you can make CGI look 100% real. But if you're in the real world where you don't have that much money, relying completely on CGI is a huge mistake. But it's a wonderful process to sweeten things up and do things that would be very difficult otherwise. It doesn't have to be either or. Jurassic Park is still like the best CGI movie ever made because very little of it is CGI, just the stuff they needed to be CGI. Everything else was animatronics. But those are big and expensive, and Stan Winston is no longer with us. So nowadays, it's pretty much all one thing or another. Although there are filmmakers that are now starting to say, let's go back to some of that practical stuff. Still, the Gorgon needed something. CGI, sewing actual snakes into her hair, I don't know. They needed something. It didn't work. It didn't even come close to working.
Yeah, I agree with what Bill said. That pretty much sums it up.
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah.
Even Ray Harryhausen couldn't have saved the Gorgon in that one.
Uh,
Well, I appreciate everybody coming to hang out and talk about some Hammer
this is
films.
fun.
Yeah, thank you.
But
Hammer
before we get
time.
out, Hammer time.
And
Yeah,
just to get it in, fuck yeah.
He won the spin. He won the
he
wheel.
won the spin. So before we get out of here, how can everybody come find your Hammer-inspired work? So Clay, how can they find your ripoffs?
You can find us at clayandsusangriffith.com. You can we tweet sometimes at Clay and Susan, and we are on Facebook individually, primarily Clay Griffith, Susan Griffith, and there's a joint page too. So you can find us all those places.
Bill?
I do podcasts at gruesomemagazine.com. We do Decades of Horror of the 70s and Decades of Horror of the 80s, which unfortunately means there's not a whole lot of Hammer other than a few of the last remaining ones in the 70s. And thanks a lot for having me on. I love talking about this.
Fraser?
You can find me online at frasersherman.com, Fraser Sherman on Facebook, Bogatir5 on Twitter, and my books, there's a listing of my books on my website. Aliens Are Here, which is coming out later this year, has some detailed discussion of Quartermass in the Pit.
Excellent. And Greg?
Okay, once again, I don't think I actually said my name when we introduced ourselves. My name is Gregory Uchrin. You spell that Uchrin. And you can find my art on Facebook mostly under the name of my studio, which is IV Caffeine. That's CAFFEINE. So I drop in every once in a while to show a preview of what's going on with the ghost story, and otherwise an occasional political cartoon.
Well, and I have had the pleasure of trying to separate this bloodbath. I have been your host, Jim Nettles. You can find me at jamespnettles.com, authoressentials.net, authoressentialsworkshops.com, the Speculative Fiction Academy, and, around Facebook, the Hive of Scum and Villainy, that's Twitter, and of course, here at ConTinual. And we will see everybody again soon.
Good night.
Good night.